Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us in East Hartford today. My name is Hyde, and I'm the Chief of Staff at AdvanceCT. Recently started roughly 5 months ago, and prior to that did local economic development in Waterbury and the Valley. And prior to that, spent roughly 4 years at DECD. So again, thank you for having us here, or thank you for joining us here today for what will certainly be an exciting conversation with Commissioner O'Keefe. AdvanceCT really appreciates the partnership with CEDAS and always happy to join them and put on events with them. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Eileen, who is the Development Director for the City of East Hartford since 2013. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for coming to East Hartford today. It's a little dreary. We had a little strike going on Main Street, so just avoid that. I've been here for 12 years. This is my third mayor. And we are at the home of Goodwin University. When I started, it was Goodwin College. This year is its 25th anniversary. So they did start a Stone Academy over on Burnside Avenue. And Mark Steinberg was eyeing this land over here on the Connecticut River, it's just behind me. And it was an oil tank farm. So fun fact, I'm from East Hartford. So when I was a kid, the only reason we came down here was to go to the bar. That was just to the north. And that's where I saw the slow O.J. Simpson on the highway. May or may not have been 21, but I don't think I was, but it was a dive bar. So that's gone, and this was, like I said, this was an oil tank farm. And Goodwin approached the town of East Hartford and bought the liens right from the town, and applied to the Connecticut Brownfields Redevelopment Authority that was in existence at the time, and took out a remediation loan that the town and Goodwin worked together to pay back. So it took a long time. Actually, I think it was just paid back recently. So it took like 20 years to repay that. They rebuilt Riverside Drive with EDA funding. The town was also a participant in that. And they just used some of our state bonding dollars to redo Ensign Street. So what happened in this neighborhood, because it was an oil tank farm and residential, is the infrastructure that was under the ground, really was not up for a development of this size. So we've had to redo the stormwater management system, we've had to redo utilities, roads, as I just mentioned, and they have expanded south as well. So trying to get a direct connection to Route 2. So that's just a little bit about Goodwin University. They have some plans to expand out to the neighbors. They own a lot of this property. They bought one of our affordable housing centers, Kingport. That's just underneath the bridge to the left. But the retail spec office is shaky, as we all know. So they did build one where Rebel Dog Coffee is, and Larson's office, American Eagle, Federal Credit Union. But we sort of have hit the pause button on that to sort of see how the economy plays out. So in the meantime, they bought the University of Bridgeport. So they've been busy down there. So that's a little bit about Goodwin. So from my point of view, we are extremely busy. We have been very fortunate with our state delegation that we have been the recipient of a lot of bond dollars. And back when I started, somewhere in the range of 2016, we made a conscious effort to strengthen our relationship with the Capital Region Development Authority. And in hindsight, that was the best thing we could have ever done. So our partnership with CEDAS gave us the horsepower to actually think projects through on a really large scale. They sort of taught us how to do that because that's what they were doing in Hartford. So we started thinking like Hartford. Even though we're not East Hartford, we are moving into a lot of the same issues that the city of Hartford has, first ring suburbs. We have the same issues as our center cities. We're dependent on our center cities for our health, right? And we're also dependent on Hartford doing well. So our partnership with CRDA really gave us the horsepower to start really thinking a lot larger than one-offs or just doing, facade renovations. I'll get to that in a second because I don't mean to downplay that. It's just really important to East Hartford. But we started thinking of things in, $20 million and $10 million, things like of that nature. So the first project that I did was taking over Showcase Cinemas. It's been vacant since 2006. We were watching it. Nothing's gonna happen. That whole segment failed because the exit ramp went away, and when they built 384. So we stepped in and said, the private marketplace has failed here. We're gonna take this over, and we're gonna make something happen. And that sort of launched us into, again, thinking bigger, thinking about sort of rebuilding entire neighborhoods, like not just small, picking around the edges. And I will tell you, since the commissioner is here, it really started with a bar brand, believe it or not. It started with a 200,000.
Back to bars.
It started with back to bar, right? Back to bars. It started with a bar grant, $200,000 bar grant, and we brought on it was Millennium Room at the time, and they taught us to think big. Think holistically, think about the whole corridor, think about what you want to do, think about where you want to be in 10 years. And fast forward, I'm almost at that 10 years, but those types of exercises teach you to think big. I don't believe that planning exercises are a waste. I think they're the cornerstone of economic development. So that really launched us into, so don't ever think those bar grants aren't worth it, because it really launched us into this massive redevelopment of the corridor. And we got a transportation grant also from DOT. So we had a comprehensive plan for Silver Lane. And we have 3 large parcels out there, each 20 acres. So the town of East Hartford now owns 2 of those. So we own 40 acres on Silver Lane. So it has been really, really slow. COVID and a lot of other things. So we are actually not done with the Silver Lane, with the Showcase Cinema site yet. So it just shows that people in our position, we have to be really patient and really tenacious and really just can't give up. It really should not be, sort of on the table for us to give up. We can't. So I'm still working. I'm, really hopeful we're going to close that in May or June and put that back on the tax rolls for the town. And it's going to be new apartments. So East Hartford has not built new apartments. I'm sure a lot of towns here have. We have not. We have a lot of affordable housing. We're at 16%. So this would be our first new apartments since like the 90s. So the site in front, many of you may have followed this, but we actually took that by eminent domain. So I am a fan of eminent domain where it's appropriate. I know it's probably not a great word in Connecticut, but where it's appropriate and necessary. We took it for blight. We used the Connecticut General Statutes. We followed it line by line by line. And we proved with the help of Go New York team that's here, that it was a blight, and we really had no way to turn that, the private sector had no way to turn that around. So we were successful with that eminent domain action. And I'm working right now to sell that for mixed use development. Our other big project that we're working on is we're trying to create a TIF district for Founders Plaza for the Port East Side area. It's an office, really was an office park that was supposed to be a lot more built out back in the 70s and 80s, and it really wasn't. It's kind of full of like surface parking and not great old office buildings that are mostly empty right now. So we're following the Stanford Bridgeport model, and we're in the beginning stages of creating a TIF district down there. So those are like the big projects that we were working on. But I just want to get back to we used around $2.5 million of our ARPA funding that targeted small businesses. So at the same time that we're doing these big projects, we're trying to keep an eye on the small businesses, and we did a lot of facade improvements with that. So we're not just about doing the big stuff, although it's obviously very important for us to turn some of these neighborhoods over. But so we spent a couple of years in the ARPA funding and helping our small businesses in town. So those are the big stuff we have going on right now. So if anybody has any questions about anything else, let me know.
Thank you, Eileen. Thank you very much for that introduction. Thank you for hosting us here at Goodwin today. My name is Kevin Bielmeier. I'm the president of CEDAS, the Connecticut Economic Developers Association, which many of you in this room are members of, and so we appreciate that very much. We appreciate as well AdvanceCT, our wonderful partner today in this program. This is International Economic Development Week, so the IEDC, the International Economic Development Council, started this week in 2016 as a way to celebrate economic development across the globe. But here in Connecticut, we're doing it as well, and this program is a part of that. So we were very fortunate last year, almost to the exact week, to have Dan O'Keefe with us right after he just began as commissioner. He had been Chief Innovation Officer, but he had just started as the Chief Economic Development Officer for the state of Connecticut. He was gracious to give us an interview, and we're back here. Now, well, that was in Wethersfield. Today we're obviously East Hartford, but we're really excited to have him back, which I think may be a first. Previous commissioners have done these with CEDAS before, but I may think this might be the first time we've actually had the person to come back the second year. So it gives us a great way to, you survived, that's right. It gives us a great way to find out what he's learned over this year on the job. So without further ado, please welcome Dan O'Keefe.
Appreciate it. I didn't realize I'm a survivor. I did have more hair when I started this job, so maybe that's an indicative of what happens once you're living it for a year. By the way, just on the some thank yous, I want to thank AdvanceCT and Lisa for putting this together. Tommy, thank you, Eileen, thank you, Kevin, and CEDAS. So it is Economic Development Week, which means I spent the last 2 days in DC. Trust me, I'm much happier to be with you all. But on the topic of inappropriate underage drinking stories, I found myself sitting next to the head of economic development from Louisiana. And I leaned over at one point and I said, my first fake ID was from Louisiana. And she leaned back over and said, so was mine. But it was a good couple of days. We did have a chance to really meet. 26 states were there. We talked about kind of what we're doing, what's working, what's not working. A little bit about navigating the current federal administration and what that means and some of the variability that's introduced. We can talk about that today. I'm going to go through a little bit of a presentation. By the way, show of hands, who were here a year ago when I did this? Some of you were here, many of you were here, great. Prepare to be disappointed once again. So I'm going to make a little bit of a change. So you may remember then I had a presentation that had a lot of data. And what I've realized as I've kind of gone through and done this, it's many of you in the back can't even see the data. When I put it up, oftentimes you're kind of trying to read it versus what I want to do is I want to tell a story. I want to tell a story about Connecticut. I'm going to go through a lot of the data. Certainly available to answer any questions at the end if there's anything you want to kind of double click into. But at the end there's going to be a QR code. If you want that presentation with all of the data, you're welcome to it. You can download it. I would love it if you walked your friends through it. If you're trying to put people to sleep at night, it's a great way to do it. But what I really want to do is to have this be a bit more of a conversation. So I'm trying this out, and I'd love feedback as to whether you think it works rather than the sort of data-heavy approach to it. So the story I like to talk about, and I talked about it last year, is really zooming out and looking at the last 20, 25 years of history of the Connecticut economy, how things have evolved, where I think our strengths, our weaknesses, our opportunities, and our threats lay, and really talk about some of the things that we're doing to invest against those sources of comparative advantage. Really thinking through what makes us different and ways that we want to make sure that we're investing and supporting some of the ways that are our strengths, and really trying to work and chip away at some of the things that are our weaknesses, because the reality is, of course, we have both. And when you zoom out and you go through that kind of 25-year history, and we talked about this last year, we had a tough go of it coming out of the global financial crisis. So coming out of the GFC, 2007, 2008, our economy got hammered. we had and continue to have significant exposure to finance and insurance, some of the industries that were particularly hard hit by the GFC. If you actually look at what happened with our economy, we dropped the 49th most, hit the hardest in one other state by that global financial crisis. And then we experienced what has been popularly referred to as the lost decade. And that's an accurate description. So for 10 years, over the course of those 10 years, 2008 to 2018, our economy got smaller. We declined on an inflation-adjusted basis. You don't have to be an economics nerd to know that's not the direction you want economies to go in. By the way, only three states can claim that prize: us, Wyoming, and Mississippi. No offense to those two states, but not exactly the economic company we seek to keep. And then we got hit by externality none of us wanted nor expected, which was a global pandemic. Once again, our economy got hammered. But since then, I've started to note some pretty interesting trends, some much more constructive trends coming out of the pandemic. And I want to kind of walk you through them because I actually think what it means is now there's a case for optimism. There's a lot of skepticism in our state coming out of that global financial crisis for all the right reasons. Not only was our economy declining, but we were described accurately as in a permanent state of fiscal crisis. We used to do the thing that you're not supposed to do. We would spend all the money in the good years, and then we would point fingers and complain in the bad years and cut programs because we would run deficits. That's not a way to manage our household, that's not a manage the way our business, that's certainly not a way to manage a state's economy. Fiscal guardrails, which by the way right now are a subject of debate here in Hartford, that has really changed that system. And all the fiscal guardrails say at the most simplistic basis is we're not going to spend more money than we have. We're going to manage the state fiscally responsibly. And our governor, who has supported it and has fought this concept of like, no, things are good right now, let's spend money again. We cannot go back to that time because we saw what happened last time. So now, as we sit here today, we've had 5+ years of consistent budget surpluses. We've paid down our unfunded pension liabilities by almost $10 billion. We've maxed out our rainy day fund at a statutory cap of over $4 billion. That's put aside to get us through the next recession, whenever it comes. It's been 6 months away for 2 years, but whenever it does come, we are prepared. And all 4 credit rating agencies have increased the ratings on our debt. So we are in just a fundamentally different place than where we were 10, 15 years ago. And what that means is now with that sort of platform in place, that foundation now sound, that allows us to have more flexibility in our economic system. We can do more with it. We can pass an historic tax cut, one that reflects our progressive values. We can start to think about ways to invest in our economy and in our communities that are a little more transformational than what perhaps we've been able to do historically. So again, the talk is really about optimism. And the real reason why I think optimism is so important is because you don't invest when you're skeptical. You invest when you believe the future will be brighter than the present. And I think we are in a place where we can really start to think that way. Okay, so what changed? Why now are we seeing so much state pride? One is we won 3 national championships, that doesn't hurt. By the way, funny quirk of this job, I get to get a championship ring. By the way, they even etched my name into it. Like I had anything to do with any of these national championships. And there are these massive like golf ball sized things that go on a shelf and I'll eventually tell my grandkids about. But what's fueling some of that state pride? Part of it, I obviously doesn't hurt to have a national championship team. But I think it also is people are starting to see things here that they hadn't seen historically. Personal anecdote, I grew up outside of Boston, low income household, whatever, but I ended up going to a boarding school. And I remember thinking back then, like the Connecticut people just seemed to be so experienced and they had traveled, they had been on airplanes. In fact, I've been on an airplane. And I had this thing in my head that Connecticut was where you went when you made it. And I think people are starting to see that again. We've seen population trends fundamentally reverse. So not only has our economy accelerated, so we went from the 49th worst performing economy prior to the pandemic to the 17th best performing economy post-pandemic. US News and World Report just came out and increased our ranking of our economy from number 15 to number 8. So that's a sea change, but we're also seeing population trends. I think people are seeing the same thing that I'm seeing, which is now with this backdrop, with more flexibility of where to live. You don't necessarily have to live within a commutable distance to some cinder block somewhere. You can now live where the quality of life is incredibly high. Our population has gone up each of the last 4 years. So coming out of the pandemic, we're the only state in this region who's seen our population increase every 4 years. Now that creates some challenges, right? Because that means more people who need housing and infrastructure and all of that. But I like to look at that because that to me is people voting with their feet. If you see people choosing Connecticut, they're choosing it for a reason. And I think some of the reasons why they're choosing it is because this changed. Now, because they can now work here and have more flexibility, all the things that were the soft and fluffy characteristics of our economy, all of the reasons why I moved my family here in 2011, incredibly high quality of life, incredibly high quality of education, high quality of healthcare. These used to be soft and fluffy. Now they're sources of competitive advantage. Now that the system has more liquidity and flexibility and fluidity in labor markets, we're starting to see these things be actual things that matter economically. That's the acceleration in our economy, that's the acceleration in our population trends. So now that we have this kind of backdrop, it's now time to think about our strategy. How are we going to look at all of these trends? So positive economic acceleration, positive population trends, a fiscal backdrop that is now sound, a consistent environment for our businesses to consider investing. Now let's think about how we're going to take our economic development strategy and really think about ways to apply it against those trend lines. So I think of economic development as offense and defense. Defense, pun intended, is you got to protect your existing industries. The state of Connecticut, our largest industries, you guys know all this, it is manufacturing, which is principally our supply chains and our primes in support of our national defense. It's finance and insurance, it's healthcare. These are some of our largest industries. If you think about manufacturing for a moment, one thing I've said in front of manufacturing audiences, if you're asking me whether I think manufacturing is important for the state of Connecticut, I will tell you it's not. It's existential. It's 12.6% of our economy. That great sucking wind sound you all heard during the last decade, that was our manufacturing sector declining from 17% of our GDP down all the way to 10%. Now it's increasing again, it's growing nicely, it's back up to 12.6%. And you might ask, I asked myself, why does manufacturing exist and with that kind of success and that kind of growth in the Northeast? If you asked me to sit down in 2025 and point at a map and to say, where do I think a manufacturing cluster makes sense, I'm not sure I would pick a region that has high relative input costs as it relates to manufacturing. The reason why it exists here is because of our workforce. We have a 100+ year history of innovating in the manufacturing sector. You all know this, but the submarine was invented here. The first nuclear submarine was delivered here 70 years ago. We make not only nuclear submarines, we make jet engines, hopefully again soon. We make photolithography machines. By the way, show of hands, who knows what a photolithography machine is? Okay, so no fellow nerds in this room. I'm a nerd, I can tell you what that is. A photolithography, even Bron's hand didn't go up. That's probably because he's being humble, he knows what a photolithography machine is. Photolithography machines are the machines that make semiconductors. Every semiconductor in the world, this is not hyperbole, every single one, every semiconductor in your pocket is made on machines made in Connecticut. That's ASML, our North American headquarters here in Wilton. It's an incredibly complex machine. And if I zoom in on what is a nuclear submarine, super simple, stupid, zoom in on what is a photolithography machine, zoom in on what is a jet engine or an attack helicopter, to me, it's the same, it's a skill set. It is a highly nuanced skill set to make incredibly complex machinery. And that's something we've built here in Connecticut and we need to continue to defend. That's why that industry exists so successfully here. We have recapitalized the Manufacturers Assistance Act. This is the MAA fund. That hasn't been recapitalized since 2018 as part of the governor's proposed budget. We proposed adding $150 million to that, make sure we continue to support this industry as successfully as it has been. Eileen mentioned a little bit about brownfields. I guess we're standing on a former brownfield site. I'm not supposed to say this, but brownfields is my favorite program. Now you're not supposed to say that. You're not supposed to say, any of your children are better looking than the other. But with brownfields, what I love about it is you get a double benefit. With brownfields, you bring down this blight, and you're able to recreate something incredible. And in the state of Connecticut, we have a constraint. We are a land-constrained state. I was with Arizona over the last 2 days, and they're talking about these mega projects they're doing, these huge, massive data centers, et cetera. We don't have the land to be able to do that. When you're land-constrained, you have to reclaim what's no longer being used to its best economic use case. Brownfields not only are being reclaimed because the economic use case has moved on, but they tend to dot our waterfront because these sites needed water for cooling or for bringing in material. So to me, it's like not only we're reclaiming our land, but we're reclaiming some of the most beautiful sites in Connecticut. So I love this program. We continue to see very robust demand. By the way, we just got passed through regs review and looks like it's likely to ultimately become successful, moving from something called the Transfer Act to a release-based system. I see nodding heads, so you guys all know what this is. This is a huge thing for the state of Connecticut. Our economists estimate that that's gonna add over 2,000 jobs, over 100 million in state revenue, almost $4 billion in GDP, incremental GDP. So this is a huge thing, and it's gonna move these thousands of sites that have been mired in this ridiculous, antiquated, and the good news is we were very early as a state in making sure that we cleaned up some of these sites. The bad news is we just didn't modernize, and so we're finally modernizing. We're one of only 2 states that still have a transfer-based approach. So brownfields, we continue to invest to make sure we support. Strategic supply chains is a program we announced in January. You know, it's interesting, despite being very much, just broadly defined, this is not a political comment, it's a factual statement, a blue state. We were actually the first state to announce a program that was aligned with what we expected to become rising protectionism under a Trump administration. So we announced this in January before the inauguration. This is a program specifically focused on repatriating production capacity. So if you are a producer in one of our strategic industries, so it can't just be random, and you have production capacity in an area under threat of tariffs, we'll help you and incentivize the repatriation of that production capacity. We haven't announced the finalists or the awardees yet, but we'll be making our first announcement next week, actually. And then there's a series of others that are behind that. So this is, I think this is an example of trying to demonstrate that we need to stick and move as an administration as we work with different administrations, regardless of what I might agree with the outcome. It's important to know that we're hard at work making sure that we're sticking and moving. All right, now going on offense. So that's some of our defense, pun intended, that's making sure we're protecting our existing industries. Going on offense is, now as we look at the next 5, 10, 50 years, my background is in investing. So I spent 25 years thinking in 10-year terms and investing in 5-year terms. Now in this job, I can think about 50-year terms. Really thinking about what the future might look like, where Connecticut has comparative advantage, and making sure we're supporting the workforce of our future as we move into that future. One of the things that we focused on, and it was mentioned that my first job was Chief Innovation Officer. That's a role I still hold. We've established an Office of Innovation within the DECD. We've announced a series of initiatives around it. One is AdvanceCT. AdvanceCT is the first time collaboration between Yale and UConn. Think about that for a second. Our 2 R1 research institutes have never collaborated together in their storied histories. That needed to be fixed, and it has been fixed. So now Yale, UConn, and the state of Connecticut, we've established a public-private partnership, first-time collaboration between those 2 schools. It's at the most senior levels. The head of research from both universities is on the board of this organization. And this is about applying these next-generation technologies, quantum, artificial intelligence, to our core industries. Because our core industries will be fundamentally transformed by those technologies. One of the biggest, I think, opportunities for quantum and AI is drug discovery and biotech. And so it shouldn't surprise you that New Haven has a center of gravity around some of those applications. The second thing we announced is innovation clusters. This is a $100 million program. There's 3 finalists we've announced. We haven't announced final awardees, but the 3 finalists are, I mentioned New Haven, that's the application of quantum in biotech. It's one centered around Stanford, which is the application of those same technologies, but in financial technologies. And then Hartford around insurance services, insurance tech, and advanced manufacturing. So that all is continuing. We'll continue to kind of invest and find ways to make sure that we're positioning also our workforce to take advantage of these trends, and make sure that they're trained by the point at which things like AI, et cetera, are truly applicable. Small business. Small business is the bedrock of any economy. We have our Boost program, which is our small business lending program. Very successful program. It lends at a fixed rate of 4.5%. I joke with everyone, if you're a small business, you should be taking advantage of this, put it in cash and make money on the arb. But regardless, this has been a very successful program, continuing to support small business in Connecticut. I talked about brownfields being incredibly important, but we have a variety of ways that we're also investing in the vibrancy of our communities. This, again, coming back to our comparative advantage. A big part of the reason why people choose to move here is because it's an incredible place to raise your family. It's a very high quality of life. So Community Investment Fund, this is our biggest program. It's an $875 million program, investing in extending and protecting the vibrancy of our communities, and also with a focus on some of our more distressed communities, those that really need that investment core infrastructure. Okay, last slide, and then we can talk about anything you guys want to talk about. Headwinds, and I guess this picture has Again, once again, pun intended. There are a few things that are holding our economy back. The first is energy. Energy is our biggest issue. So our industrial energy prices are 117% higher than the rest of the United States. I could sell a lot of things about Connecticut. I could sell quality of life. I could sell a labor force that's expensive. It's a very high quality labor force. I can't sell a megawatt that is 2 times more expensive than the rest of the United States. That's a tough sell. Now, there's all kinds of reasons how we got here, happened over the last 15 years. But if we can't solve for relative energy prices, then economic development is almost for naught. And while the energy problem is a regional one, because we're part of a New England regional grid, the issue for Connecticut is much more existential, because I mentioned our exposure to manufacturing. So 12.6% of our economy is exposed to manufacturing, a high energy input sector. The next closest state is 8%. Ours is increasing. That sector is growing as a percentage of the pie for us, even though our overall economy is growing. Just meaning it's not like getting bigger because it's flat, the economy is declining. That's a bigger portion of a bigger pie, and every other state is declining. So we have to solve this problem. The solutions are complex, and will take real political will, but I happen to think we have a governor who's willing to make those decisions and understands what needs to be required. So this is one that's a real challenge for us. Second biggest challenge is housing. Governor's putting $800 million into housing, a big portion of that affordable housing, but that continues to be a challenge. I mentioned the good news about the population trends, people coming into the state. The bad news is it happened at a point at which we saw supply chain constraints and inflation, which made building the housing harder. We started to see a really nice uptick. So if you look at new housing starts, that was relatively flat at about 4,000 to 5,000 per year. Net positive, meaning you're adding to our housing stock, but not accelerating. In 22-23, we saw a really nice acceleration in that number. It was up 50% in 2 years, 46% up being exact. And then last year it declined. It's still positive, but it declined in terms of its growth as we saw rates increase and some of those supply chain problems get introduced to the market. It just got more expensive to build housing. But the governor's budget continues to propose $800 million invested in housing, including affordable and workforce. We'll keep pushing on that. We'll eventually get there. Last problem is workforce. We have a consistent gap in the state of Connecticut of about 90K jobs, more jobs available than we have people to fill them. Part of how you fix that is with these continued population trends. Part of how you fix that is really working closely with our higher ed institutions to make sure they're training the workforce of the future. We work really hard to keep our communities amazing, so students choose to stay here rather than go to another place. All of those things I think are happening, and the governor is investing $145 million in workforce. So we'll get there and we'll keep working on it, but I think those 3 things, energy, housing, and workforce, continue to be a challenge in holding our economy back. All right, with that I can close. There's the QR code if you want the nerdy data-driven presentation. Nice to see some phones come up, some fellow nerds in the room. But I think now we can stop, and any Q&A, or I guess it's going to be...
Yeah, I'll ask you a few questions. Dan, okay.
Thank you.
So Dan, you covered a lot. I'm not surprised in the presentation. You've been doing this, the roadshow quite a bit. In fact, I just want to give you kudos that I think in my recent 10 years in this, working with the economic development field in the state, that I would say you're the most out there, accessible commissioner that I've seen. I mean, you're doing a great job, spreading the gospel, so to speak, of Connecticut around the state, and we really appreciate that. So. This room is filled with economic developers on the local level, as well as people that intersect the work that we do. So I want to work backwards and just start with this and say, what do you, this is your Jerry Maguire moment, okay? How can we help you, help us, help you? What would you like to see?
Thank you. Hello. So I think the biggest challenge I have is the amount of skepticism that still exists in our system. And I get it now. Now that I'm in public service, I get all the snark online. I got like people that comment and say Hartford is broken, and you guys never fix problems. And I will tell you, now that I'm in this world, one of the things that I got cautioned about was be prepared to be disappointed by the pace of change and the quality of the people. Now, pace of change, look, democracies are built to move slowly. I get that. The quality of the people has not been an issue. There are incredible people, and I think a lot of people in this room who are very hard at work and being very thoughtful about ways that we can continue to grow our economy and make sure that access to that growth in the economy is equitable. The challenge I have is that skepticism. That skepticism, I talk to audiences all across the state, And I always do this thing, I don't remember if I did it here last year, but I'll say show of hands. Actually, let me do it here now. Show of hands. How many folks knew we were the 17th fastest growing economy in Connecticut? Now, okay, that's the most hands I think I've ever seen in any audience, which might be because it's the second time I've been here. So it might be because I talked about it last year. But then I'll say, so I usually get 1 or 2 hands. It's typically folks, that work for the DECD. Then I'll say, show of hands, who knew when we were the 49th worst performing economy in the community? And then all the hands go up in the room. And that is a dynamic that we know exists, and it's human nature. We pay attention when the news is bad. When the news is good, it's just frankly less interesting. It's written about less, it's paid attention to less. So I have this challenge, and I need help with it, which is I talk to audiences like these. My guess is I probably speak to, I don't know, it's in the thousands, but I don't even think I break 10,000. Thousands of people per year trying to get this word out about what's going on, because we all need to support fundamental transformational investment in our economy. I think all the things we're doing are important and they're good, but the biggest investment I have right now is Community Investment Fund, that $875 million program. Its largest investment is just over $20 million, which is bringing down that PSG plant in Bridgeport. Now look, a $20 million investment in our economy is important, I'm glad we're doing it, but that ain't transformational. It's gonna be transformational for that particular community. I'm not sure it's gonna move the needle on an overall economy. We need to start thinking bigger. Over the last, call it 6 years, we've had about $11 billion in surpluses. That's what we use to pay down unfunded pension liabilities. It's been higher now, it's probably $12 billion. But that's what we use to pay down unfunded pension liabilities and max out our rainy day fund. I'm glad we did all of that. That was paying down the mistakes of our past. We now need to start thinking more fundamentally about investing in our future. And the only way that happens is if there's political will. If we all look around and support our elected leaders to say, you know what, we want to see you folks make some more transformational, progressive investments in our future. And that takes optimism. That skepticism. If it's warranted and driven by data, I'm all ears. If it's an historic perception that is no longer fundamentally accurate, then you're being lied to. It's just not true. And that's where I need people's help. I need audiences like these. You are the folks paying attention. There's 3.6 million people out there who aren't. It's called 3.5. And we need to make sure everyone is aware of what we're seeing now so that we start to do some of these more fundamental investments.
Okay, good. We can do that. Can we do that?
Yeah.
So when you say yes, we can do that. Okay, so you touched on this a little bit with that answer. So if you could go back, because we're in a unique position here, where, like I said, we're 1 year from when you were with us last, and that was like 1 week on the job. So so here you are, Dan, year 2. What would you say if you could say something back to Dan, year 1, that might have made this year easier?
Oh man, that's a great question. I'll tell you what I've been learning, and there's no way to make this easier. So unfortunately, it's going to be something I'm dodging your question, but it's because the question is not answerable. What would have made this easier is understanding the breadth of ecosystem and relationships required to affect change. I mentioned, democracies are built to move slowly. That's done for a reason. But if you want to affect some of the fundamental change I'm talking about, that takes really activating a very broad ecosystem of contributors to decisions. Very early on, I would suggest things, we should be thinking about X, Y, or Z. And then times would get phone calls from someone saying, hey, I heard you're working on this. I've been working on it for years and would love to talk to you about what we've been doing. And sometimes I'm even like, well, who is this person? I didn't even know this person existed, let alone have a relationship with. You spend time not only with the executive branch, so the folks I work with every day, but members of the legislature. The members of the legislature are an incredibly important partner in affecting transformational change over the long term. You really have to bring people along. And so if I could give myself any advice a year ago, although I'm still failing to give myself this advice today, it's move more slowly. Really try to understand the broader ecosystem such that you do build those relationships. You do bring people along, and you start to tell a story that people can understand and kind of see what you're talking about, see where you're trying to take things. And that's why I think, stepping back and I talk about, telling a story, talking about where we're going and making sure people are agreeing, or if they're not, they're voicing their disagreement early enough along that you can learn from it. That's what I'm spending a lot more time doing now, is spending more time with a broader ecosystem, really understanding who might be involved or who should be involved, and trying to think strategically about not moving so quickly that you don't actually get to where you want to go.
I think that applies at the local level too, but we can all attest that there's so many different stakeholders, and you got the land use and the zoning boards, and you've got the public, of course, and nothing happens without everybody working in tandem, and that's a difficult part of the job at the local level and at the state level. So along that lines, if you there's only so much money, right? And you talked about the fiscal guardrails and the need to hang on to those for all the right reasons. But then there are then choices I want to invest in, and you've hit a lot of the programs in your presentation. You in your role as Chief Economic Officer, you're sort of like the economic development whisperer to Governor Lamont's ear. So obviously he puts out the budget, but there's a lot of input from someone like yourself. Just help us into the thought process of making those decisions.
Yeah, and it's, and by the way, I want to, when you say decisions, they're thoughts as they relate to trade-offs. So the decision gets made by the process. The budget is an iterative process. Again, we work very closely with the legislature and the governor's office to make sure we iterate, ultimately end up in a place that we think appropriately reflects the trade-offs required. So let me step back and just talk about base principles. First base principle, you said it, we need to honor the fiscal guardrails. We cannot go back to a place where we put everything on the state's credit card and let future generations pay for it. We still have a high per capita debt rate. We still have work to do here. By the way, those unfunded pension liabilities have been growing since 1939. So we're not just paying down the mistakes of our past, we're paying down the mistakes of our grandparents, great-parents, and grandparents. And so, but that's work that needs to be done. Those are commitments that have been made, so we need to continue to do that work. And we just simply have to make trade-off decisions. One of the things you realize coming into this world is everyone has priorities, and that's awesome. Every person in this room has something they think should be prioritized, an area of investment that they think, they believe, they truly believe is the right thing to do. And guess what? They're right. That's not the problem. The problem is if you add up all of those priorities, it's like 400% of the amount of money we have. So it doesn't mean they're not priorities. It just means you need to make trade-off decisions over time. You need to work through these priorities, and you need to make some hard decisions and have some hard recommendations, because if you prioritize all of them, then you've actually prioritized none of them. So what I spend time doing is thinking through those priorities, thinking over time, thinking longitudinally, saying, okay, we want to make sure we kind of get to this place over time, but we also recognize the fact that we have to do it apace. There's only so much you can do because you are in an era of this fiscal constraint. Now, there's a new variable and a new problem, which is what's happening at the federal level. Now, I'm not a big government guy. I am all for government efficiency. I think we should be doing as much as we can with as little as possible. That is what we should be doing as stewards of state dollars, of your dollars. The challenge is not the fact that the federal government is trying to get smaller. What's the problem is messaging. So what we're wrestling with right now is uncertainty. I am super fine. Tell me the answer. If the answer is that something is getting cut, we'll figure it out. The problem we're having right now is everything is at risk of getting cut. And I cannot tell you the number of phone calls I get every day and the number of phone calls the governor gets every day saying my program, my priority, my initiative, the thing I care so passionately about that has been funded historically through federal dollars is at risk of getting cut. So now we have a new issue, which is federal spending in the state of Connecticut represents $14 billion. I mentioned we have $4 billion set aside for an economic recession. We don't have $14 billion set aside for a Fed funds recession. There are over 13,000 federal employees in the state of Connecticut. When those programs get cut, when those are folks going on the unemployment rolls, there's downward pressure on our economy. There's another issue, which is when uncertainty gets introduced to a system, you start to see people move into a defensive position. So what does that mean? Consumers right now aren't spending the same way. They've moved into defense. Consumer sentiment dropped. So it's financial markets have gotten better, but when the tariffs were originally announced, consumer sentiment dropped the fastest it's dropped since the 1990 recession and got as low as it was during the global financial crisis. So consumers have moved on to defense. Businesses, I spend every day talking to businesses, small and big in the state of Connecticut. They're deferring investment. Businesses will just wait. They'll wait to make large investments if they don't know what the rules are. Government spending is getting cut, and net exports are under pressure because of rising protectionism. What I just described, consumer spending, business investment, government spending, and net exports, that's GDP. So it's all under pressure right now. The challenge we have is when we get phone calls saying, hey, I'm at risk of getting cut, what's the state gonna do? Could the state consider replacing it? We can't make those trade-off decisions until we know how big the hole is. So that's making this budget process that much more challenging. We're trying to plan for the next 2 years for the state of Connecticut, Everyone is talking about priorities and their priorities matter. And at the same time, we're trying to make trade-off decisions and message things in a way that is predictable for everyone to understand what the rules of the road are gonna look like when you have all this uncertainty at a federal level. So it's an interesting time right now. I think that's part of why you're seeing so many headlines about the budget this year.
Yeah, that's great, and we were gonna talk federal impact, but, we just did. There we go. So yeah, that was something I definitely wanted to talk about, and you clarified that for me, you know, the uncertainty of the federal impact and how you're grappling with it, how you're dealing with it. Going even broader globally, so that, you know, there's a lot of messaging going out around the world about America and where we're at, and I would assume that trickles down and affects Connecticut, and plus Connecticut right at this moment is trying to seek international investment. So you can talk about, you know, the India trip and anything you want to talk about regarding international investment.
Yeah, no, look, I think in moments like these where the federal uncertainty increases, this is actually a moment for states to make it super clear that our trading relationships matter, and we'll continue to protect and focus and grow them. So Kevin mentioned the India trip. We did an international trade mission to India, and it was a really successful trip. We were joined by Indra Nui, who is a Connecticut resident, former CEO of Pepsi, and is an Indian national. By the way, super fun walking around Chennai with Indra Nui. It's like walking around with a famous rock star. Little girls come running up to her from on the street. She's that well known in Chennai. And we met with many of our large companies that are also have locations in Connecticut. And we met with a number of companies that are considering establishing operations in Connecticut. Last year we did a very similar mission to Germany, which is our largest trading partner, both FDI in and exports out. And you know, we're focused on continuing to make sure that we reduce friction for some of these channels of trade, to make sure that they know that Connecticut continues to be a place that is welcoming not only to the companies but also their employees. And I think this is a really important message for us to send, which is what's happening right now. I'll give another anecdote. The governor and I met with a European company that was continues to consider establishing North American operations. Very well-known, high-profile, but private company. Founder comes over, meets with me and the governor, and I had this whole presentation ready to go. Let me tell you about the state of Connecticut's economy and what's happening in the West. It'd be a great place to put your business. He didn't want to talk about any of that. He wanted to talk about whether or not Connecticut would be a place where his employees would want to live. He wanted to talk about, you know, particularly if you're an international observer, again, not a partisan statement, just if you look at all the headlines, there's so much, you know, that looks like, massive dumpster fire, maybe that does sound partisan, but, so continue to send the message that you are welcome here, is really important to us. You know, if I step back and just look at what has been our economic engine as a country for so long, part of it has been our willingness to allow people to come here who are willing to contribute, willing to work, want to raise their family here. That is the American dream. And right now there's a lot of uncertainty about that. And doing these trade missions, you know, making sure that our international partners know that we still care, that this is still an incredible place for their employees to want to live and raise their families, and that they're welcome here. You know, I think that's a part of our economic engine and a part of our values that we need to continue to protect and talk about.
That's it. In the sake of time, let me jump to this. This is more on the personal side, but I think it's also a good message for our audience. We do have some younger economic development related professionals in the audience, which is fantastic to see. And then there's some of us who are more senior. And you have done quite a bit of work with nonprofits that have been close to you, and also in mentoring, and people that have been mentors to you. And I've heard you speak on this, and I think it's a great message. And then I'll open it up to the group.
I just did a podcast, but it just came out even though I did it a year ago. And I will tell you, I hate to watch myself speak. I can't possibly sound like this. So I never watch myself speak. But because it came out a year ago, I happened to watch it, and I did talk a lot about mentorship and what it's meant to me. Look, I don't talk about my background much, but I went to Wall Street having absolutely no idea what that even meant. My father thought I was a broker. He would send me like pink sheet trade ideas, and I'm like, Dad, that's not what I do. I was in investment banking, whatever, and then I went into the investing world. But my only point being is I had no real understanding. I had worked for math, but no like relationships or a way to get an interview or any of that stuff. I had to sort it all out, figure it all out, and I got lucky. I got lucky because two people took a bet on me, and I'll tell you exactly who they were. Joe Gallo. So Joe Gallo was the head of M&A investment banking at Solomon Party where I worked. He and I happened to meet at a cocktail party. At the cocktail party, they invited everyone getting an interview to work there, plus alternates. Alternates only get an interview if somebody cancels. Nobody ever cancels these things, right? These are like super coveted jobs. So I showed up for the free booze. And he and I ended up talking to each other, and I didn't even know who he was. I didn't ask. He was clearly worked for the firm, so I wasn't exactly, I was being strategic, but we talked for like 2 hours, and we talked about everything other than banking. We talked about WWE, great Connecticut company, and then WWF, and we talked about Jimmy Superfly Snuka and the Hidden Object and all this great stuff from like 1980s WWF. And he said to me at the end, what time's your interview tomorrow? And I said, actually, no, I'm an alternate, I don't think I have an interview. He said, no, show up at 7 a.m. and I'll interview. So he interviewed me during his breakfast. Ultimately, gave me an offer to join his team. I did join his team. Joe became an incredible mentor to me and helped me meet just the ecosystem of folks in that world. And then later, Joe retired and called me and said, hey, I'm retired now, just looking for things to keep you busy, whatever. I said, actually, I've got a company. I was in the investment world now. I've got a company that's struggling. I need someone to help me fix it. I need someone to come in as CFO and help me fix it. Joe went on to be CFO of 3 of my companies. We worked together for 25 years. Still friends, still text all the time. Second person, Alan Patrikoff. So after banking, I went to a firm called Patrikoff & Co. Ventures. Alan Patrikoff was the founder. It's a funny story how we bonded, which I won't tell publicly, but if you ever want to hear it over a cocktail, I'll tell it to you. But Alan pulled me on to all of his deals. And this is a guy who obviously founded the firm, was one of the first venture capitalists in the country, founded the firm in the late 1960s. An incredible person. By the way, he would take you to task. If you screwed something up, man, this guy would lay into you. Thankfully, I had thick skin, and I would just take it. But he was fair, because when he laid into you, it was because you did screw up. And Alan, to this day, is my last phone call before every hard decision I make, including rejoining the firm Apex Partners, which, by the way, is Alan Patrikoff Associates Cross Border. The firm I worked for before I came into public service is that firm he founded. Patrikoff became Apex. And then when I was talking to the governor about coming into public service, he was my last phone call before I stepped back from investing and moved into this world. If it were not for that, if it were not for people taking a bet on me and seeing something that I couldn't see myself, I would not be here today. And I often sometimes get asked, what motivates you? Why are you doing this? By the way, everyone who thinks you're in this world is because you're like running for something. Newsflash, I'm not. I'm doing this because I shouldn't be here. I don't deserve to be here. I got lucky. I met some incredible people who helped me be here. And now that's what I want to do. I want to help create a system and an environment and an economy that can help other people do what I did, which was move out of a lower income place to wherever I got, really establish a family and a career and all the things where I got lucky. That's why I do this. And again, it wouldn't have been possible without mentorship.
Thank you, Dan. Well, we're glad you're here. Let me open it up. We got a couple minutes just for some questions. Who would have a question? Just shout it out. Paige.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Dan. Statewide, obviously great programs, initiatives. I have heard from every corner of the state, even regionally, really the challenges at the local level, resistance to change, which then translates to NIMBYism. When I worked in Groton with Robert Boris, we had problems there. Also, the sector always covers here. Thoughts on how to help at the local level break through the resistance that impacts housing, new business, emerging technologies, etc.
Yeah, look, this is such an important point, which is, we're in a state, for better or for worse, we don't have county government. We a lot of what does happen at the local level. And I'm going to steal a couple quotes. First, I'm going to steal from Mayor Cantor of West Hartford, who has this phenomenal quote that I love, which is, you might like what you have now, but you're going to love what's coming next. And that concept of renewal, I think, is incredibly important. and making sure that the voices that are excited about renewal are at the table. What happens at the local level, affectionately referred to as NIMBYism, is the most vocal voices that show up at all of these planning and zoning commissions, they tend to be the folks who are most resistant to change. Sometimes for personal reasons, it might quite literally be in their backyard. Sometimes they just like, they're nostalgic. They like what used to be. And now I'm gonna steal something from Thomas Haynes, who some of you know, developer in the state, and he made a great point to me, which is, I activate the local level. I make sure communities know that this incredible project is being discussed, and we need the counterbalance to show up. We need the counter voice to show up. So I think you're asking the question because I often get asked, can the governor take stronger control at the local level? Look, we're always balancing that, right? We wanna make sure, he has taken an approach, which by the way, I understand, which is the local level is the point at which people most understand what's the right outcome. When that runs into more NIMBYism, and it's actually not the right outcome, it's just holding back renewal, that's when the counter voice needs to be introduced. And his point has been, and I would shout this to all of you as well, we need a better way to activate that. We need a better way of saying to folks who are in a community who might not be aware that a planning and zoning commission hearing is happening on a project that would be great for that community, to show up. Show up and have their voice be told. I mean, it's really surprising to me that we don't have a mechanism like that, to put the word out when local changes happen, that matters and should be supported, to make sure those voices show up. If your question is more, can the governor take a stronger hand? Look, we debate that. We've seen other states like California do that, where they've come in with a much stronger hand. I can tell you right now, he's still seeking to strike that balance. But look, if we can't get to where we need to get to, which is more housing, more affordable housing, more workforce housing, then at some point we're gonna have to take a stronger hand. That's not, again, a keep comment, that's not a government law comment, that is a reality comment. We have to build housing. And I also take this concept of affordable housing incredibly personally. I grew up in what one might traditionally define as workforce housing, except we stretched the definition to pack 8 people into a 3-bedroom. But my mother was a public school teacher. And if we didn't have that housing that she could afford, and she was the only breadwinner in that family, then we would not have had an incredible biology teacher for 35 years in Medfield, Massachusetts. So that I think also needs to be something people understand, is this is not about, everyone ever watched The Wire? I used to love that show. It was all about Baltimore, thank you, and the drug, and it was like these row houses. And I think there's this thing that if you build workforce housing, affordable housing, it's gonna be like these row housing and these drug dealer. This is not that. Workforce housing in a modern sense can be done incredibly. And by the way, it's our teachers, it's our firefighters, it's our policemen and women, it is the people that make our communities grow. And what's NIMBYism, what drives me bonkers, is when it's offered as an economic argument. If you put this in, my housing value is gonna decrease. No. If we don't put this in, your housing value is not going to increase because we can't keep our economy growing.
Paul?
Yeah, just to couple on to the energy costs, and I've heard you speak on this before, but how do we drive down the cost curve for energy such that we're more affordable in the Northeast?
Yeah. So this is the question of our time. And this is, by the way, where it gets super complex and super political, but one of the nice things about running for office is I don't give a shit. I will tell you exactly why. Look, over the last 15 years, I understand why we did this. I'm an environmentalist. I think we have to be investing in a renewable future. We have to be thinking about what a carbon-free future can look like. What we did is we created a system where we defined timelines, not just goals. We defined timelines. Those timelines were aspirational and laudable, and I'm glad we did them, but we allowed timelines to dictate relative price, when it should have been the opposite. We should have said, as a system, as a society, we're gonna invest in these renewables, we're gonna invest in this renewable future, but we're gonna do it at a pace that allows us to continue to be economically competitive. If you look at back when we deregulated, 20 plus years ago, and you look at the relative price between the region, again, it's not just Connecticut, it's New England, and the rest of the country, that's when we saw the disparity start to increase. And now we're in a place where, again, we're 117% higher in the rest of the United States. The political debate that's happening, I understand. But I will tell you right now, whether or not the public benefit charge is on our bills or in our taxes will have no impact on our kids' future. We pay for it either way. I'm fine with the debate. I actually, I have my own view on it, and it's fine. But if you actually want to change what we're looking at, you have to start to think about more transformational investment. Second problem we have as a system is it's like a massive prisoner's dilemma. So if people are familiar with the prisoner's dilemma logic problem, you've got two prisoners that can't talk to each other. If one confesses, they both get shot. And in that dilemma, they both confess because they can't coordinate. In a prisoner's dilemma, the way to get out is to coordinate. We have a regional problem, and yet states are left to their own decisions on procurement. Should we do some wind? Should we do some solar? Should we do some whatever? And that is a problem when we are a net energy exporter. So the state of Connecticut, which is a nuclear state, obviously, we export our energy. And it's not because we can't stand at the border and stop megawatts. The energy flows wherever the greatest demand is. So if you're wondering who the sucker at the table is, we are the sucker. We are the sucker. And I see two paths to the solution. One is not politically palatable, or at least not politically popular, which is we need more natural gas. That is the cold, hard reality. 15 years ago, we stopped incremental natural gas from coming to the state. That was not just us, by the way, that was Massachusetts, that was New York. But that's where we are. By the way, it's 46%. Jonathan, keep me honest here as I quote things you know better than I. But 46% of our economy right now. By the way, I've seen it, it's about 17% now, I think, renewables, and 22% is nuclear. That's the other solution, is forward investing in incremental nuclear capacity. I've met recently with Dominion, the operator of a nuclear power plant. Right now they're spending zero time, zero resources on incremental nuclear. That has to stop. You have to start thinking about more fundamental investments in incremental natural gas for the short term and incremental nuclear for the long term. And that is hard, because what I just said doesn't get people elected, right? And that's the reality, and we gotta think through that. Now, I'll keep saying this, I pander for nobody. I happen to love our governor. I mean that. I've seen him make decisions. I've seen the political pressure he gets from so many different sectors, but he makes good decisions, he makes thoughtful decisions, and he makes data-driven decisions. And I don't know if he's running again, but I hope he does, because I don't see anyone else that's gonna fix that problem.
Right here. So many other states funnel sales tax revenue back to local communities to help make stakeholders of the local community and avoid the pushback for NIMBYism. What's your opinion of that? In Groton, I'm the chairman of the Economic Development Commission. A lot of the problems we have is community members don't want more traffic. They don't feel that the growth of tourism in that area benefits them. So it really is a lot of headwinds. So my question is, what do you think about that? Other states do it, and would you advocate for that?
That's actually, I will always tell you what I know and what I don't know. That is not something I have personally analyzed. So I'm not gonna sit here and pretend I can give you an informed answer as to whether or not increasing the amount of support, be it tax driven or otherwise, to individual states will help with NIMBYism. I struggle a little bit with that, if I'm being candid, only because I don't think money that is driven by taxes is the solution to our problem. I think finding ways to support development efforts that we all agree are important for the future of the state are the argument we should be having. And I also find, I did this when I first joined, I did this analysis of how come property taxes haven't gone down in the state of Connecticut as the state has given more support to the local level. And the reason is, and by the way, this is like data you can look at, the correlation between property taxes and state budgets, local budgets is 100%. Meaning it's all driven by and when I said, well, how can the correlation be 100%? How can it be perfectly correlated? And the reason why it's perfectly correlated is because cities and towns come out with their property taxes, their budget first and then their property taxes, so they back solve. So I struggle a little bit with giving more money and thinking that's gonna solve our problems. I think we have to start to think through again is we've created a system that's around community engagement, so engage the community and solve. So again, that's not a helpful answer because it's not directly answering your question, but it's actually how to study that particular issue.
All right. Last question, James Blanc.
Have you seen, as a workforce question, do you see kind of a disconnect, or is there a disconnect between the preferred educational track of our young people, maybe baccalaureate degree and masters, and the educational track required for those 90,000 jobs?
Yeah.
Which may be trade, certification, and manufacturing. Is that a disconnect?
100%.
Yeah.
That's the problem. I think as a society, by the way, I'm someone who benefited from a 4-year, Bachelor of Arts degree. I think, college, let me broaden it. I think education as a path to personal transformation is something I'm incredibly supportive of because I benefited from it myself. But I think we've over-indexed. I think what's happened as a society is we've put so much pressure on the concept of a 4-year degree, when the reality is, you can and should have an incredible life, be able to raise a family, have a middle class life, be able to afford the car, the vacations, whatever, through the trades. That's part of the challenge that we have right now is, these 2-year degrees or these apprenticeship programs that can end up in a place where someone can have an incredible life has become perceived as a failure by not only a lot of young people, but by their parents. So actually, it's funny you mentioned this, because I was just talking about this yesterday with some of my fellow states who have some of these programs where it's not just about workforce training, which is a big area of investment for us, but it's also about marketing the outcome. And marketing the outcome not just to kids, but to parents. Making sure that we as a society start to value that again. Because I think, you see all these 4-year schools now, and if you run the math on what it costs to go to some of these schools, how much debt our kids are going into, and whether or not it's actually worth it in the long term, it's very hard to know that when you're 15, 16 making these decisions. And sometimes it just frankly isn't worth it. It was actually the wrong decision to go into that debt for that ultimate outcome, when we should be aspiring to some of these jobs that are not requiring those kinds of degrees. Couldn't agree more.
All right. Big round of applause for Daniel Keith. And there's the contact information. He's happy, I'm sure, to receive emails and follow up. And thank you all for joining us.